One of the most important lessons in life, don't forget to tip. Now, this is something that has become really kind of a hot button issue in some places, but the thing is, calculating gratuity is an important skill. Whether it's at a restaurant, at your barber, anywhere where someone is providing a service, the idea of gratuity comes in, and when and how much do we tip? So I'm not going to answer the question of when, we're just going to talk about how. And how much? So you are treating a friend to dinner, and your total comes to $56.78. Your service was incredible, and you want to leave a 20% tip. Estimate that value, and then go ahead and find the exact value. Now, the reason we start with estimate is because you probably don't want to just pull out your cell phone anytime you want to leave a tip. You want to look at the number and then say, okay, I'm going to tip this amount. And how do we do that without, thinking too hard? Here is the first trick. If we are starting with $56.78, first I want to just talk about 10%. This is the easiest thing to calculate because 10% is the same as multiplying by 0.1. And if you think about multiplying a number by 1, well, it doesn't change. So multiplying by 0.1, we're simply moving the decimal. So 10% of $56.78 is moving the decimal is 5.678. So this is 10%. Now, if we want 20%, we just double it, right? Because 20% is double of 10%. So if I double this, right, just have the same amount again, that's going to give me 20%. Now, you might say, well, I don't exactly do that adding of that many decimal places in my head. And you're right, I don't either. So if I was doing this and sitting at the restaurant, I would say, okay, if I move it one decimal, I have about 570 because I can handle that much. And if I do 570 and 570, that gives me 1140. This is my estimate. Now, if you could go one step further and say, I don't even want that many decimals. Great. You could say, well, when I move the decimal and I get 5.678, I'm just going to round that to 6. Great. Double that and you get 12. That's a good estimate. It really depends on if you want to go a little, right? Because 570 is a little more than 10%. 6 is kind of a lot more than 10%. If you say, well, the service was good, but it wasn't that good, well, great. Maybe you round down to 550. And when you add that, your estimate is 11. Those are all great ways to estimate. Now, if you want to do the actual, so if you do have your calculator out, you can always take your 56.78, multiply by 0.2 because that's 20%, and you get $11.36. So you can see the first way I did it, where I got 1140, it's pretty close. So the key is to be able to look at a number, change it to 10%, and kind of go from there. Now, that's not too bad if we're talking about 10 or 20%, but what happens when we get to 15? All right, so you use a grocery delivery service as you're feeling ill, and it would be quite difficult to drive in the bad weather. I totally did this when I had COVID. But anyway, so due to these circumstances, you want to tip your grocery helper 15%. Your grocery bill was $132.93. How much is your tip? Okay, again, we're going to do this the estimate way. Okay, so if my bill is $132.93, I'm going to start by 10%. So 10% means I move it one place. And I get 13, I'm just going to round to 13.29. That's kind of ugly, but we're going to go with it for now. So that's 10%. 15% would mean I need a 10 and a 5. So 5% would be half of the 13.29, right? Because if $13.29 is 10%, half of that would be 5%. So this is where it's time for me to do some better rounding. I don't want to do that kind of decimal work in my head. So I'm going to say, I'm going to take 13.29 and I'm going to round that to 13 because half of 13 is 6.5. So now I can say, okay, 13 is an estimate of 10%, 6.5 is an estimate of 5%. So when I add those together, I'm going to tip approximately $19.50. Now, if I do an actual, if I would do the 132.93 and multiply by 15%, which is 0.15, I get $19.94. So you can see how the $19.50 is very close. And you could always round that up to 20 if it makes you feel bad that you rounded down at some point. But the idea is by moving the decimal one place, we can get to 10%, and then you can tweak from there. So if you say they were good, but they weren't that good, I'm going to tip somewhere between 10 and 15%. Great. Start with your rounding of 10 and then perhaps round up. So maybe if you round to 13.29, then maybe you say, okay, I'm going to give them 15 because it's more than 10, but it's not quite 15%. Great. That is a great way to estimate and get about the percentage that you're looking for when you are tipping or calculating gratuity.